Hartford. For the rest of you, welcome to the town hall. I'm sure you've been here many times. Thanks all for coming. I have a couple of announcements before we start. One, parking. The gates are up, which means you do not need to validate your parking. You'll be able to get out of the parking lot without paying. Yay. I've also been asked, it seems pretty obvious to me, but the exits are where most people probably came in that direction, all the way down the hallway, or straight out the back door. Leads you to the steps to get out. So if there's any reason to rush off. The other one is important. At 7:30 tonight, down the street at the corner of Farmington Avenue and Main, there's a Shining a Light on Democracy vigil promoting Restoring the Voting Rights Act. This is being sponsored by the League of Women Voters of Connecticut. Many of us will be walking down there at the conclusion of the talk today. So you don't have to rush off. I think pretty much this is supposed to end at 7:30 and that's starting then. So if people want to walk down together, it might be nice to join the vigil. It's a good night for democracy. So before I introduce Congressman Larson, I would like to ask people to stand for a moment of silence. Now, this moment of silence is not just for thoughts and prayers for those murdered this week and for their communities in Ohio and Texas, but with my hope that we will consider how we as individuals, as a community, and as a nation can work to end the epidemic of gun violence and the threat of white supremacist terrorism. Thank you very much. So I now have the great honor of introducing our Congressman John Larson. Now, I work for the Federation of Teachers, and so I like to remind people that before he was Congressman Larson, and even before he was State Senator Larson and Board of Education member Larson, he was Mr. Larson, a history teacher in East Hartford. To be a great teacher, and I have heard that he was one, takes fierce intellect and a passion for your students, for your community of learners. John has brought those same talents to his work as our congressman. We see it every week, and we should all be proud of him. Just this year, certainly not resting on past accomplishments, John has worked to pass legislation lowering health care costs and drug costs, protecting people with pre-existing conditions, improving election security, one of the topics of the vigil tonight, establishing universal background checks, raising the minimum wage, and working to keep us in the Paris Accord, so vital to our planet. In addition, and sort of most interestingly this year, I think, is he has introduced his landmark bill, the Social Security Act 2100. John, as in his role as subcommittee chair of Social Security on the Ways and Means Committee, he is fighting to not only protect Social Security, but to expand it. I'm certainly very interested in hearing more details about that act. So I know you'd rather hear from him than me, so I will end my statements by again introducing Congressman John Larson.
Thank you. Well, Ben, thank you very much, and it's always great to be back home. Can you hear me? Good. It's always great to be back home, and can you hear me now? A little better? How about now? I got a big mouth, so we'll always great to be back home. and especially great to be back here in West Hartford, as I often like to say, the epicenter of the 1st Congressional District. I was reflecting on the way over here of the number of public forums that we've had just this year, but also it seems like any time there's a momentous happening in the nation, we have a public forum in West Hartford. We did so during the onset of the war in Iraq. We did so before the passage of the Affordable Care Act. And here we are today after this horrific weekend that we've experienced yet again, acts of domestic terrorism. This is our 11th town hall this year, and we're going to have many more, including teletown halls. But I think it's the best way for me, and Ben mentioned, and thank you again, as a former teacher, not just to tell you what we're doing down there, but also to have the opportunity to listen to you and to hear your concerns so that I might be further informed in my own judgments and in the actions that we take down in Washington, D.C. So as Ben also mentioned, and I wanted to make sure that because I promised the League of Women Voters I would be prompt and try to get everybody out by 7:30, but I commend them tremendously for their Shine a Light on Democracy Vigil, celebrating 50 years of the Voting Rights Act, and especially in this day and age, as hard it is to imagine that the Voting Rights Act is under siege as well, as we see state by state try to alter and make it more difficult for people to vote. So I hope you'll join with them at the corner of Farmington and Main for their vigil. In the first 200 days, Democrats in the House have passed numerous pieces of legislation. We have handouts. I'll make sure, if I were to go into all the legislation, it would consume an awful lot of time. Suffice it to say that a lot of that legislation is currently sitting on Mitch McConnell's desk. Most notably, as you might have heard me say yesterday rather vociferously, universal background checks, making sure that we close what's referred to as the Charleston loophole, and also passing the Violence Against Women Act, all three of which have passed the House of Representatives more than 160 days ago. Make no mistake about it. When they say that, oh, well, this is Congress. No, this isn't Congress. This is the United States Senate. They could come back tomorrow, and you'll hear me say it again, and I believe the President should implore them to do so. He has said that he will sign universal background checks. He even intimated to Dianne Feinstein that he would be receptive to a ban on assault weapons, which currently sits in the House Judiciary Committee, but will be passed over to the Senate, as will other legislation. It's not about gridlock, it's about the lack of will. Since when in a great democracy and what used to be called the most deliberative body in the world, the United States Senate, do we not take votes? If you disagree with the measures at hand, you have the option to vote it down or to amend it. If you have a better idea, if it is in fact video games that's responsible, if it is in fact other issues that you believe are more responsible, then put them forward. Funny thing about that, since Sandy Hook, there's been more than 2,000 mass shootings. Have you read anything about the video game legislation that was put forward apparently that's causing this? Or all the other legislation supposedly that they're very concerned about? Apparently you missed that. So did we. But if you are concerned, and listen, let's be honest, there are concerns about video games. There are issues, both cultural and health-wise, that we should be concerned about. But have any one of them been put into law or to put into a proposal that people would vote on? The time is now to hold people accountable. If you got a better idea, put it forward and let's vote on it. That is, after all, what our democracy is based on, that the Congress should be a place where the vitality of ideas is openly debated and then voted on. Elections have consequences. I think all of us appreciate and understand that. I like to point out that having served in the Congress now, this is my 11th term, only 2 of those terms have we been in the majority. And now being in Congress, I'm honored to represent this district and be in the majority. Having a gavel makes a difference. Being the chairman of the Committee on Social Security on Ways and Means means you get to not only introduce legislation, but you actually get to hold public hearings on it. And what a novel thing in Congress, you actually get to vote on it, which is what you send members of Congress to do on your behalf. I often speak of regular order. My family jokes with me and say that it sounds like I need to be on Metamucil or something, but I think this is an important thing for people to understand. Because by that, I mean returning to a process where the vitality of ideas are discussed fully, where a bill is introduced, it's taken up by the committee, there is a debate in the committee, it is then voted in the committee as to whether it will go to the floor or not, and then upon arriving on the floor, it's then debated and passed on to the Senate. Much like universal background checks just happened. Much like closing that Charleston loophole just happened. Much like the violence against women just happened. Elections matter because those bills previously weren't voted on in committee, weren't brought up. They were discussed, but never was action taken. By contrast, and I know many of you have heard me say this before. By contrast, we voted a $2 trillion tax cut, which I gladly opposed, a $2 trillion tax cut, 83% of which went to the nation's wealthiest 1%, unpaid for, so that debt is foisted upon America and its future. And when asked how they pay for it, some on the other side, not all, but some, especially in their leadership, said, we're going to do that through entitlement reform. Now, Daniel Patrick Moynihan happened to be a favorite of mine, and very eloquent speaker, old Irish, as we like to say. And he said, you know, the Republicans are far better than Democrats at messaging and at branding. I think it was Will Rogers that said, I don't belong to any organized party, I'm a Democrat. That still holds true today, I might add, but in a solid and good way. But what Moynihan said about the Republicans that you should all pay attention, he says what they use very successfully is something called semantic infiltration. Leave it to Moynihan to come up with a phrase like that. Semantic infiltration. And he was referring specifically to entitlements. Because they plant a seed and everybody starts talking about entitlements. I'm the chairman of the Social Security Subcommittee. Is Social Security an entitlement? Absolutely not. And easily refuted by looking at a pay stub. Because it says FICA. What does that stand for? Federal Insurance Contribution. Emphasis on insurance and contribution. Whose? Yours. As is the case with Medicare as well. Items that you have contributed to throughout a lifetime. These are earned benefits. These are not entitlements, nor are they the bane of governmental existence. Do they need to be actuarially fixed? You bet they do. And we're going to do that. And I'll talk a little bit about that when I get to Social Security. But I raise this because of the importance of getting back to regular order. Regular order in the days of social media is even more frustrating because you get your news in bites, sound bites, and clips, and basically on what the tweet of the day is, and also in terms of what will sell, what will be of interest to people. Solving and fixing problems in regular order, let's be honest, it's not necessarily what you're going to pull up a chair at your TV, to the TV and be interested and hold your attention. But it is the way that a democracy and a republic functions, and the way that we have to continue insist that it does. Lest what happens, a $2 trillion tax cut gets passed without ever having a public hearing, cut up in a back room that foists a $2 trillion debt on the American people, where 1% of that goes, 83% of that goes to the nation's wealthiest 1%. That's what happens when you don't have a public hearing, when there isn't open debate. But elections have consequences, and we're out to change that. We're in the majority now, and There are a number of things, including a wage increase, including, most notably, after the events this weekend, universal background checks, making sure that there's equal pay for equal work. These are all items that have passed the House of Representatives. They have not been taken up by the United States Senate. So I wanted to raise that tonight. And Michelle Obama, I absolutely adore. And you know, she has that saying, when they go low, we go high. Well, when they go low, we do the right thing. You do the right thing. And the right thing is to make sure we're doing things in regular order and that we're accountable and we get back to the public. We hear back from them. And as Ben pointed out, we continue, and always as part of being an elected official, your responsibility is to educate the public. And I don't expect that everyone's going to agree with me on everything that I propose or what I think or what I voted on, but they have a right to know the thought process that went into it and how I feel or why I voted for a specific issue. So tonight I thought that I would, and I'm going to try to go through this very rapidly because I mean it when I say I want to get to what you had to say. So I want to talk about 4 pieces of legislation that I've introduced personally. And I've already alluded to Social Security, but we also have a big infrastructure issue that's existed in this country for the last 8 years where there has been nothing done. Nothing in terms of stepping up to the plate and passing a bill that will allow us to rebuild the country and put the nation back to work. I have a bill called the American Wins Act. It's fully paid for. And I think that's the other thing that elected officials have a responsibility to do, is to tell you how they're going to pay for it. We do it by passing a carbon tax, which happens to be also, I think, parallel to solving the climate change issue that we face here in this country and around the globe as well. It produces about $2 trillion in revenue by most estimates. It's widely accepted by most Republican economists. And what it does is puts a price on carbon and then also returns money back to the consumer, back to the displaced worker, and into a fund to rebuild America, which will put 13 to 20 million people back to work. And will allow for projects like the one we're proposing here for Greater Hartford in terms of fixing the #1 logjam in the state, the I-84-91 interchange, an interchange that has divided North Hartford, an interchange that has separated the city of Hartford from the Connecticut River, a system that also finds levees that protect both sides of the river, and for a dollar amount that won't be that much more significant than replacing the existing viaduct system that is horrific. We cannot repeat the mistakes of the last 50 years. It is Congress's responsibility. The state of Connecticut, no state has the wherewithal to do what are federally designated programs. So we have proposed tunneling those, taking 30 to 40% of the traffic that never enters the city of Hartford and bypassing it underground and opening up and recapturing our river, repurposing our bridges, recapturing not only the river, but creating a livable community on both sides of the river that will expand economic growth and I dare say pay for itself. Some of the tunneling experts have told me that maintenance costs alone, the savings on tunnels, will pay for itself over a 25 5-year period. The issue is this. A, you have to have an infrastructure bill. B, the money has to come from the federal government. And C, you have to have a vision that's connected to both economic development, livable communities, and intermodal transportation that is interconnected. We can't go into these infrastructure programs thinking about the past. We have to go in thinking and projecting about the future and what it will mean for economic growth. That's the American Wins Act. We have something here for that you're all familiar with, the enormous student loan debt that people are burdened with. I say people, because not only are students burdened with this, it might come as a surprise to many of you, though maybe not all, because some of you, I suspect, are in the same situation that I am, that baby boomers actually bear more debt than millennials in terms of college tuition, because they're helping pay for their children's tuition. Bottom line is this. President Kennedy said long ago, when he encouraged people to serve their country, when he established the Peace Corps, that is the most important thing that you can do, is to be about the service of your country. So if that's the case, why don't we have a GI Bill for people that serve in the Peace Corps, or VISTA, or Teach America, or Senior Corps, or serve in any function that the Corporation for National and Community Service has designated one that will bring value back to a community, so that for every year that you serve your country in a designated program, we'll give you 2 years of in-state college tuition, or the equivalent, to lower the debt that you have incurred. Nothing's free. You got to work, and you got to earn it. And what better way than to work in the service of your country? And economists, again, have looked at this and said that there is a payback value to this. Because of the service that is rendered, it becomes a value-added service that ultimately continues to pay for itself by the service that people are providing. We also have healthcare remains the number one issue for the country to solve. As I remember fondly coming off of a hospital bed and being here as we talked about the Affordable Care Act back in 2009, it wasn't a perfect solution, but 20 million more Americans got health care insurance. Pre-existing conditions, which are now under assault by the current administration, were resolved. And we were well on our way to coming up with making sure that there was universal access to health care. Not a perfect solution, but a step in the right direction. Well, we've come up with a proposal, and being back in the majority, this is top on our agenda. You hear this being debated out there in the presidential campaign as well. But no one has picked up quite yet on our proposal, but they've alluded to it through a public option and a way to make the system work. What we're proposing is a Medicare buy-in program. Medicare is the gold standard for health care. We're proposing, Joe Courtney, Brian Higgins, and myself, and close to 100 co-sponsors, that you ought to have the opportunity, if you're age 50 to 64, to buy into the Medicare program, even with your employer's assistance. Why do we say that? Well, for a number of employers, small and large, as they look at their sheets and the green shades go down and look at the cost of insurance, and they're looking at what it costs a 64-year-old versus a 27-year-old, there's an inclination to want to have that older person move on. It's not stated, it's unwritten, but all of you know that it happens, and it's true. But what if they could buy into Medicare? And what if, as an employer, you decided to help out? The Kaiser Family Foundation did a study, and you know what they found? A 60-year-old could buy into, they took the equivalent of what the gold plan is under the Affordable Care Act and found that you could buy into Medicare for 40% less. The other issue is that if 50 to 64-year-olds were to buy in, well, we live in one of the great insurance arenas of the world. What happens when younger people join into another group? The rates go down. Oh, and speaking of younger people, what would happen if the major group that we were looking to insure was 27 to 49? It would dramatically lower the costs for employers, employees, and individuals to receive insurance. We live in a system currently where approximately 180 million people have private insurance. Look, I embrace the concept of Medicare for all. We're headed in that direction. How do you get there? You're going to get there, I think, by taking incremental steps that are responsible and that are rational and can be achieved. And oh, by the way, revenue neutral, because they're paid for. So that's an idea that's being debated currently in Congress with health care that I'm a sponsor of. And as someone was criticizing me the other day, saying, oh, he doesn't go to a forum where he doesn't talk about Social Security. I go, well, I am the chairman of the Social Security subcommittee, so I would hope that, and I want to say this because oftentimes people forget that Social Security is more than a pension. 1 in 5 recipients of Social Security is under the age of 62. Because as many of you in this room know, Social Security also is spousal and dependent coverage, a death benefit, and disability coverage as well. It is the nation's #1 insurance plan. It is the nation's #1 anti-poverty plan. How about this? The last time Congress did anything to fix Social Security was in 1983. Right? 1983. So Ronald Reagan was president. Tip O'Neill was Speaker of the House. People say, well, geez, yeah, they worked together to get it done. They did. And actually, Ronald Reagan was ideologically opposed to Social Security. And what other people forget is, oh, by the way, who was in control of the Senate? The Republicans. Howard Baker. In fact, Republicans throughout history, I mean, obviously, Roosevelt deserves the credit, but if you look at what Dwight David Eisenhower did, coming home and understanding, even though he was avowed against the New Deal, and his brother wrote him one time and said, I can't believe you've turned into a socialist. They even used it back then. And he said, anyone who's witnessed what Social Security does and what it's doing specifically for the men and women who served under me, if you don't support this plan, you're stupid. That was Dwight David Eisenhower. But they expanded the programs. Social Security hasn't been expanded in 50 years. Now, It's an insurance program. So let me see a show of hands here. Have any of your insurance premiums gone up since 1983? Oh, yeah, but, any of them, Have any of them gone down? Yeah. Okay. And so, because you have to make actuarial adjustments. Who's in charge actuarially of Social Security? The United States Congress. And so, in order to make the plan what actuaries would say is sustainably solvent, that means it's solvent beyond 75 years. Ergo, we call it Social Security 2100. That is the responsibility of Congress. And shouldn't we enhance it? Have things changed since 1983? So how about we give everybody a 2% across the board increase? Right? 2%. By the way, does anyone hoard their Social Security checks? This money goes right back into the economy. I'll get to that. Hold that thought. But 2% across the board increase. And then nobody should be allowed to retire into poverty. Ladies, listen closely, as if you didn't know this already. But it doesn't come as a surprise to anyone to find out that women who have worked a lifetime and paid in all their quarters can retire and get a check from Social Security that's below the poverty level. Why? Well, A, they were caregivers, and so they didn't put in the quarters all the time that their husbands or male counterparts did. But as importantly, they didn't receive the same amount of money. White woman got 80 cents, black woman got 56 cents, Hispanic woman got 43 cents to every dollar their male counterparts did. So doesn't it make sense to say that the new floor for Social Security will become 125% of what the poverty level is as determined by the federal government, so that we equalize this in a manner that makes sense. 2% across the board increase, nobody can retire into poverty. A COLA that's based on what your actual expenses are. Not on the CPI, but at what the AARP refers to as a CPIE. E standing for elderly, those costs being doctor's visits, pharmaceuticals, physical therapy, heating and cooling your home, the basic essentials of life. And then making sure that the program is sustainably solvent by making sure that that money is going to be there. And oh, by the way, speaking of sustainably solvent, for those who continue to work, A, out of necessity, or B, because they feel more purpose in their lives, should you be paying a tax on that Social Security? Well, back in 1983, it was an index, so that if you're single and making more than $24,000, you're taxed. If you're a married couple and making more than $32,000, you're taxed. So we changed that to $50,000 per individual, $100,000 per couple, and index it into the future. More than 12 million Americans will get a tax cut as well, and the system will become solvent. And, oh, by the way, if you're going to do something like that, you need to do two things. It needs to be paid for. And to be paid for and to say, well, Larson, that sounds good, but have you had this checked out? This is the notice from the Social Security actuary saying that everything that I just said is not only paid for, but is solvent beyond 75 years. How is it paid for? All right, I'm going to get there, don't worry. So everywhere I go, I bring this Starbucks, and usually there isn't too many senior centers that I haven't visited in the 1st District. But I enjoy saying this because I say, how much is this Starbucks? And usually the seniors will say, is it a latte? To which I respond, yes, and they go, $4.50. I go, you're right. Or, this represents, under our proposal, 9 weeks of Social Security payments. So, what we've done is say the contribution, since there hasn't been a contribution, an increase to the program since 1983. So I said, we're going to increase the contribution by 1%. Okay? And as you know, when you increase that, you pay 1%, the employer pays 1%. The employer gets a pre-tax write-off for his contribution. You get the benefits of Social Security, including the new enhanced benefits. If you were making $50,000 a year, it would cost you 50 cents a week. Or, for this one latte, that's 9 weeks of Social Security payments. We also lift the cap on people making over $400,000. Raise your hand if you're making over $400,000 right now. Well, because, I'll get there. That's 0.6% of the country who do that. There is, every year, the Social Security amount will increase. When I first introduced this bill 7 years ago, when we were not in the majority and couldn't get a hearing, the cap on Social Security was $112,000. It's now $132,900. It will continue to grow, but we lift the cap. It creates a donut hole. It'll be reached by 2054, but allows us the space. What that does is help us with the more than 10,000 baby boomers a day who become eligible for Social Security, and that's why we put it in there. And not to burden millennials in the future. And the Republicans have gone from saying, this is a entitlement. Well, we pretty much pushed back on that, and as I can see all the heads nodding out here today, largely because the American people are not fools. They know that it's not an entitlement. They know it's the insurance they paid for. They then said, you're overburdening the millennials. We said, no, as a matter of fact, millennials are going to need Social Security more than baby boomers. And they're going to need it more because, A, they're making less, maybe the first generation that makes less than their parents did. B, because they are burdened, as we talked before, with college loan debt. C, because they live in a gig economy that people have written about extensively. And D, because they're having a harder time getting mortgages than any other generation. They need the guarantee of Social Security. How do we know this? We don't have to go back to the Great Depression. We only have to go back to 2008, when people's 401ks became 101ks. The Fed issued a report late November, early December of last year. In that report, here's what it said. There may be a few of you in this room that are impacted. 90% of all Americans have not recovered their wealth and assets from the great crash of 2008. 90%. So now let's put these things together. 90% of America hasn't recovered their wealth and assets from 2008. During 2008 and every year before and present, Social Security never missed a payment during that time. It is the full faith and credit of the United States government. It is an absolute guarantee. It's not subject to what happens in the marketplace. So, at that same time, there was a tax cut. Everybody likes tax cuts, don't get me wrong, and you were all told that you were getting a huge tax cut, except as it turns out that 83% of it went to 1% of the nation. And oh yeah, you get burdened with the debt because it wasn't paid for. And now we have people on the other side saying Social Security is too expensive. We can't afford to do this. Are you kidding me? In every single polling by every single independent organization, Democrats, independents, and Republicans all say, we'll pay a little more. We'll pay that 50 cents a week so that we have the guarantee and the enhanced benefits. We've had 5 hearings on this bill, most recently in late July before the August recess, and we're going to mark that bill up. That's a committee term for passing it in the committee in September and pass it in the House of Representatives this fall. Elections do matter, and they do make a difference. We have some pretty remarkable people that are in the audience tonight, too, who have, a couple of them might have left, but they were there yesterday at the press conference that we had at the Capitol, and you know, Connecticut Against Gun Violence, Newtown Action, Mothers United Against Violence, and Sandy Hook Promise, and they spoke far more eloquently than any elected official. But this can't go on. And the only way to stop it is to vote. I have called upon, I think Democratic candidates for president should suspend the campaign and go sit on the steps of the Senate until Mitch McConnell comes back and they are forced to vote. And again, if you got a better plan, if he's got a better idea, but how can it be that you can't in America have a vote on an issue that has been with us and has plagued the nation? What kind of a nation, what kind of a republic are we if we can't vote? If you disagree, well, this is the nation where you get to have your disagreements in public, out in the open, on the floor of the House and the Senate. And where the vitality of ideas ultimately determine what becomes the law of the nation, or the public will have a say in terms of who's going to be representing them in 2020. Can you imagine that the president of New Zealand, after she witnesses the horrific gun violence there, says that she's going to follow through with an executive order, but the New Zealand legislature convenes and passes a ban on assault weapons out of response to the tragedy. In 2019 alone, there's been 251. Someone said, one of the women's groups said, no, it's 255. Mass shootings. There's been over 2,000 since Sandy Hook. Come on. This cannot allowed. And Mayor Bronin was there talking also about the other kind of gun violence, too, that plagues our cities. You picked up the paper this weekend and you saw Hartford, New Haven, and Bridgeport, all with shootings that took place as well. It's epidemic proportion. And in Congress, we pretend like it doesn't exist and that there can't be a vote on it? You're right. They're I don't disagree at all with what you
say that. We're here, you're our leader. Lead us, rally us against the actual causes of these problems. Republicans are not going to go back to the way they were before Trump. This is the way it is now, and we're expecting our leaders to understand that and respond to the crisis that it is.
and
At all, and I've called for months to get a statement from you about impeachment. That has not happened. And the president of the United States is a white nationalist. And we're waiting for you to treat the situation with the attention it deserves. Why are we standing here, sitting here, waiting for you to say the truth to power when you have the platform to do that and none of us do? We elected you to do this.
You have a moral obligation as a member of Congress to stand up to this president and at least defend an opening of an impeachment inquiry. And you have not done that.
There will be
Either go on the record impeaching him doing the right thing or co-signing his corruption.
There will be a time for you to speak. And there will be, please, listen, I honestly appreciate your frustration. I appreciate and have listened intently to what so many people have said about the president and about impeachment. There is something called the rule of law. It is our job, if I'm allowed to, it is our job to do as I've suggested, in regular order, as is being done in 7 separate committees, all undertaking and going through the process. That is a frustrating process. I readily understand how you feel. It's a frustrating process, and you want it to happen tomorrow. Okay, hold on. Listen, I understand the frustration that individuals have, and many people have written us with respect to this. My opinion is that what we need to do is constructively go through fact by fact, case by case. The Judiciary Committee is currently going through that process, but it is a process. Our job is to get to the truth. It's not to impeach, it's to get to the truth.
That is seeking truth. Our democracy is dying and you're giving us platitudes.
There, I respect what your feelings are with Look,
What are you doing? With all due respect, what are you doing? How are you organizing? We already know the truth. You don't need to spend more time trying to find out the truth. We need to organize and organize from the inside. What are you doing with the squad and other people who are standing up and organizing?
Congressman,
yes.
I think that was. I voted for you every time since I was 18 years old.
Right?
Every time I've met you, I've stood up and I shook your hand whenever you walked into a room. And there's a lot of respect in this room. There's a lot of respect in this state for you. And that's not going away right now. What you're hearing right now is anger and
I
frustration
understand that.
in the way things are being done in Washington. There's always been that anger. There's always been that frustration about the way that things have done in Washington. But this is different. You know why it's different? It's different because the methods have changed. Now, you spoke of your friend Moynihan, and he said the Republicans are better at rebranding. Well, you better believe they're better at rebranding. And conservatives may not be good at change, but their handlers and their leaders are really good at changing their tactics. And they're really good at breaking the rules. They're really good at it. So it's not your call for business as usual in the government, your call to educate us. We don't need to be educated. We need somebody to stand up and do something. And I'm going to give you a promise right now, because I'm a father. I just became a father. He's 2 years old. And every day I go to bed and I think about these children that are in these camps, which can only be described as concentration camps. That's the only term. And as a father, I don't even understand how people cannot think about this every night, that these kids, they don't know. They don't know why. You know, we talk about innocence. You know, we talk about innocents being locked up. It's not because they're innocent of a crime. No, it's not because they're innocent of a crime. They're innocent of knowledge.
Protesters are not indicted.
They're innocent of, I understand what you're saying, I'm not protesting. I'm talking to my congressman, and he's listening.
Listen to the congressman.
We've listened to the congressman, we gave him an hour, and now he's, Congressman, to tell this gentleman to let me finish, please, because I have a point here. My point is,
You have a
if
question, let him answer.
I have a question. I have a question. Why are you not in jail? That's my question. Because if I was a congressman, I'd be sitting in that jail with those kids right now, changing their diapers. You talk about the candidates going and sitting on the steps. You talk about the candidates going and sitting on the steps of Washington. I'm sorry, they're running for president. They haven't become president yet. You are there. You are a person of immense power. Immense power, but your power is being sapped. And it's you talk about these things you've passed. I'll stop. I think I made my point. Don't touch me.
I'm not touching you, I want the microphone.
My question is, why don't you do something? My question is, why don't you do something real? Real. Thank you.
Does not care about regular order. He has not, as long as I have been alive, and I do not have any expectation that if he and the Republicans in Congress are allowed to continue their behavior without any repercussions from Democrats in Congress, then we are going to lose the republic that I love. And I'm watching as people like yourself with this enormous platform have chosen to do nothing because it's politically expedient to do so, or because it's too difficult to stand in a room like this and say,
It's not difficult at all.
I believe Donald
It's not
Trump
difficult.
deserves impeachment.
Excuse me. Excuse me. Would you,
I have,
no. As a matter of fact, as I said before, as frustrating as it is, the rule of law needs to be followed.
Why do you have a majority?
All the
if you're
more
not gonna use
reason
it?
if someone doesn't follow the law, the old two wrongs don't make it right. This is, if we're going to preserve a democracy, if we're going to do things in the way that they need to be done, then you have to make the point. We have won numerous cases within the courts already. We have been advised by legal counsel in terms of how we should proceed. Of course, if the goal is just to create a mentality that says impeachment but doesn't follow the rule of law,
It's to hold him accountable.
you hold him accountable by going through the process in every single committee, in painstaking detail in every single committee.
With an inquiry for impeachment.
You have the floor.
if part of the reason for not starting impeachment is because we, quote, know that the Senate will not act on it, that does not seem like a reason to back off from our moral responsibility to bring this president to account.
That isn't the case. The case is that there are 7 committees, including the Judiciary Committee, that has primary responsibility and is currently undertaking the inquiry. But even Chairman Nadler said in his paper that they are going through in great detail he said he was going through in great detail to gather the data to make his case for the inquiry. That's the way it has to be done.
Anything that prevents an impeachment process from beginning now, along with the other inquiries. I don't think there is, and we, as your constituents, are asking you to be a part of that.
Well, I think that it's important that you begin a process with the data from all the committees that are currently working on it. The Judiciary Committee will arrive at that decision, and they will present that to the body as a whole. And then the body will make that determination. But I think it's important, and I don't want to make light of this at all because of the gravity of the situation. Since I've been in Congress, every single president has had impeachment proceedings brought against them. And if you end up weaponizing a democracy and a republic so that every time someone's elected that the resolution is impeachment, then you're not doing your job in terms of the collection of data and information. I feel as strongly as you do about the president and his behavior, but even the President of the United States is entitled to the process that we go through.
There's an impeachment process, and he can
There
be
is.
entitled to.
There is, but you have to get there. And it's not as though there hasn't been a full report that's been issued already. It's not as though action isn't taking place. It's not as though, Muller wasn't called back. It's not as though McCann isn't being asked to come before. This is the process. It's like the old saying, we're going to have a fair trial and hang them. You can't, it's not a matter of just saying impeach. It's a matter of collecting the data and making the case. I know that that's frustrating, but that is the rule of law.
Congressman Hannah Roditi from Bloomfield, I am horrified by the tone and the demeanor that you have today in this session. And I'll tell you why.
Okay.
I'll tell you why. Because the house is burning down. We have children being caged. We are being murdered by out-of-control guns, and no one is doing anything about it. Our world is on fire. Our world is becoming unlivable. And I hear no outrage. I hear no sense. You're talking data and protecting the rule of law. No one here is disputing the rule of law. That's not what this is about. This is about the need to be bold now. This is a time for boldness. Right? Isn't that, we are looking for Democrats with a spine, with boldness, who are ready to go out and get arrested, who are ready to stand up and say this is wrong, to go to the front lines, to stand with people. And what are you doing? You're talking about protecting this and that and the rule of law when that is not the issue. You're hiding behind that. And so you seem so complacent. And maybe we do have to elect new people in who are young and who get it. Maybe it's time for you to be out of here. I don't know that, but I know that it's time for you to stand up and be more bold.
Go ahead, sir.
Hey, John. Dennis Moynihan, originally from South Windsor. I live in Hartford now. Good to see you. First of all, I read your informational on impeachment. I encourage everybody to get this pamphlet that Congressman handed out. You're on the House and Ways and Means. I guess it comes down to that we have to get the tax returns. We have to get the bank records. We have to get that done.
We have to get all of those. That requires a lot of work.
Otherwise, we know what's going to happen. We have to get that to convince the Senate. I understand that. Just a quick point. Secondly, you spoke on health care earlier. My mother was 35 years old, divorced. Unfortunately, she's retired. She's retired into poverty now. I support her. I'm a Hartford teacher, as you were a teacher. Medicare is just not the gold standard. She has to pay $250 a month extra on top of her health insurance. We need answers for our health insurance now, not later. I also want to ask you to support a constitutional amendment to repeal Citizens United and take corporate money out of politics. And, the reality is that no one here is truly represented in our Congress. The large corporations and companies are truly the ones who are running it. That's a system you inherited, and I understand you have to raise money, but I'm asking you to be part of that change collectively together. I also teach at McDonough Middle School in Hartford, Connecticut, and I'm proud of the students that I teach and the families I'm advocating for right now. They are living under years of oppression, from mass incarceration to no health care, no pay increases, unaffordable college, and the opioid drug crisis that was started and created when the United States Congress allowed Big Pharma to do whatever they want. And I'm urging you to join our political revolution and adopt more progressive policies. Lastly, and I have a question for you, I believe in your vision for Hartford and the I-84, I-91 plan. It must happen. However, I don't think it will happen unless we have the federal government infrastructure bill, as you mentioned, and unless we elect a real progressive as president, that won't get supported. So what can we do, John, to make that plan happen and to bring Hartford into the next generation? Thank you.
Well, again, we need a massive infrastructure plan, but also on, and you make a good point, on the Medicare buy-in program that we also have direct negotiation for prescription drugs, and to lower the prices across the board. That's exactly what we're going to need to do, and Medicare ought to be able to be part of that negotiations to drive those costs down, and providing public options for people, and for people that can't afford it, to be able to open and expand Medicaid as well. That's the way I believe that we're going to get to the goal. and to do it in a very systematic, logical, and practical manner.
Thank you. Mr. Congressman, can I ask a civil question?
Yes.
Yeah. First of all, thank you very much for the tour of Annapolis at my cousin's wedding several years ago. I still appreciate it. The question I have is, I've studied Social Security for many years, and I thought we were supposed to be raising our hands, and I think I have a reasonable question.
But they're actually right. They stood in line. So
We were not told to be in line.
I know we should have done that, but some people got up and started speaking, and that's my fault. We should have said, you know, get in line, and we'll take people as they come through. So I'll wait and take all the questions, but go ahead, ma'am. You should be recognized.
Congressman Larson, thank you for having these forums. My name is Denise Peace. I'm a resident of Glastonbury, and I've worked in insurance for over 25 years, and I urge you strongly to co-sponsor HB 1384, the Medicare for All bill. It was 10 years ago that I was in your office asking for a public option, and you had no time, no way you were going to discuss that as part of the lead up to the ACA. It is 10 years too late and too little. In the 8 years...
We did include it in the House version of the ACA.
That's great, but when I talked to you, you said it wasn't going to see the light of day, and you basically, I felt, didn't fight for it then. This is what I want to say, is 8 years since then, 8 to 10 years since then, have been rocky years for me, okay? It's been a time of exorbitant premiums, cancellation notices, shifting networks, claims denied, that have caused me to enlist the aid of the Connecticut Insurance Department on 4 separate occasions to get the benefits that were due me. I was lucky that I understand insurance and where to go to get relief in a dispute. I suspect that most insurers do not and are being robbed of benefits, and are being robbed of benefits due them on a regular basis while their health and finances suffer. Your plan will undermine Medicare by driving the sickest people to Medicare while still leaving millions uninsured. It is really too little, too late. I urge bold action. I urge you to vote for, to support the House Bill 1384, Medicare for All. It's time for bold action. People are dying.
Thank you.
Hi, Congressman Larson. First, I want to thank you for coming to speak with us and also for all the legislation you're pushing for. I guess the reason a lot of us are reacting this way is we would love for you to do all of these great things, but we are all very aware of the fact that none of this will happen if Mitch McConnell is in charge of the Senate. And you're telling us to vote. I vote. I remind everyone I know to vote. I donate to campaigns. I phone bank. I canvass. I'm doing everything, and I'm exhausted. And what I want to hear is, will elections be fair? Do we have a shot, with all of our efforts, do we have a shot at getting the Senate back and getting any of this legislation addressed? Do we have a shot at getting the presidency away from this criminal? And I want to know 2 things. First, have you read the Mueller report? And then secondly, if you have, how can you justify not having impeachment hearings? And I guess my third question is, what can you do to assure us that our elections will be fair and that the Russians will not take this one from us? Thank you.
Well, thank you. Those are all very good questions. And hey, can we?
Let the old gentleman speak. I asked for a personal privilege, Chairman.
Wait a second. We're all we're all here together this evening. We're all Americans concerned about the future of the nation on several different levels. Let's start with all being respectful of one another, and the points of view that people have. So, but let me finish because she asked a multiple of series of questions. But yes, I think we're deeply concerned about the ability of the Russians, the Chinese, and other people who can manipulate elections, and that was clear in the Mueller report.
Did you read it?
Yes, we did read it. Not only did we read it, we went through it in our caucuses as well, in every part of it. And we also sat down with attorneys who were advising us legally in terms of where this goes and how you should conduct yourself as a committee so that your case isn't thrown out of court because it was politically driven instead of following the facts and the data and the information. And that takes a long time, and that takes gathering evidence. Excuse me.
Congressman,
You have the floor.
Your presentation here tonight and explaining everything that you put forth in your years in Congress. My name is Ray Shea. I'm not from Glastonbury. I'm from West Hartford, Connecticut, and I vote here. And I never know that this microphone was open for public opinions. If they had them, take them someplace else. The newspaper had you listed for 6:30 to 7:30. It's 7:15 now, and it doesn't end in 15 minutes. You're going to have to break away because you're entitled to go to the League of Women Voters.
I'm going to stay and
Thank you
listen
very
to.
much.
I'm going to stay and listen to these people. They've stood here. I'm going to stay and listen to them. Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
John, I just want to say thank you for your patience. And my question to you is, we just passed the biggest military budget in history. And I would like the Democrats to pursue a peace economy, because every penny that goes to weapons of war, it's taken out of all the things that people in this room care about today. And my big concern is UTC and Raytheon are looking to merge. And Raytheon produces weapons of mass destruction, and they are the weapons that are destroying Yemen and killing Yemeni children. So my concern is, I know this is our economy. I know that we are a defense contracting economy. But I would like to see the Democrats really looking for more progressive solutions and channeling our money not so much into defense, because we cannot extricate the fact that AR-15s are weapons of mass destruction, and these are weapons being used on our own citizens. So the weapons we are producing are ending up in our own streets, and they're killing our own families. So for today, the idea of a peace economy is something I hope our next president is going to pursue, and the House and the Senate. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you.
Thank you, Congressman John Larson, for being here. I'm Madeleine Hexter. I live in West Hartford, Connecticut. I, along with, I think, everybody in this room, including you, very upset about what's happening because of the current president and the Republican administration. I'm part of a group called ROAR, which is grown out of the Women's March. And we do things little, like writing postcards to support Democratic candidates. We go out on the corner of our main street in Farmington, like we will tonight, for various causes. Tonight is to restore the Voting Rights Act, and I want to thank you for supporting that bill, H.R. 4.
H.R. 4.
Because as I'm wearing white to represent the women suffragists who fought for a women's vote, and the vote for all people in the United States. Without being able to vote, we won't be able to change what's happening in our government. There's one issue that hasn't come up. There's so many issues I'm upset about, but one is climate change and respecting science. So I urge anybody in this room who would like to do something tonight to come with us and join us on the corner of Farmington and Main. And I have flyers for that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your dedication and work as well.
Hi, Congressman. I'll make this quick. You said that the rule of law somehow includes an impeachment inquiry at this time.
Does not preclude it at all. That's not what I said. I said that we're following the rule of law, which means that every committee is doing what their committee is assigned to do, and collect the inquiry has already begun. It's begun in the Judiciary Committee where it belongs. In the Ways and Means Committee, on which I serve, we have gone after the financial records. On the Financial Services Committee, there are other aspects of it. On the Intelligence Committee, they're going after the foreign policy side of it. There are different committees that have different areas of cognizance that they are pursuing on every level. 7 different separate committees are all involved, and the matter is going forward. There's no stopping this. It's the matter of collecting the data and information and doing it through the committee process under the rule of law.
Congressman, though, Nancy Pelosi herself has said that Trump deserves to be in jail. How do you square that with, saying we just have to continue investigating?
The oversight and review under the Constitution is the responsibility of the government, of the Congress. We are carrying out that responsibility on Elijah Cummings' committee, which is oversight and review. And we have had many people. There are many members of Congress already, 118, who have called for impeachment. I believe I have an obligation to review the facts first. I believe that deeply. Now,
Where do you stand on an inquiry?
please, the gentleman has the
Did you watch the Mueller hearing?
Pardon?
Did you watch the Mueller hearing?
Yes, I did.
And that's not enough to just begin an inquiry?
Where does the inquiry begin?
It should begin
What
by
committee
declaring
does
a
it
formal
begin in?
impeachment
What
inquiry.
committee does it begin in?
One
Judiciary
place it can
Committee.
begin is Judiciary.
Is the Judiciary Committee beginning the inquiry?
No, they've begun an
Yes,
impeachment
they
quote-unquote
are.
investigation.
They have. I am not on the Judiciary Committee, but as they go through their process and as they collect data and as they go through this, they will present in regular order to the Congress what their findings are.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you for coming tonight. I appreciate
I'm
you
honored to be here.
taking our questions and listening to our concerns.
I understand people's frustration. I really do, and I understand your anger. And I don't know how people can't be angry and frustrated at this time. But when you're angry and frustrated, and I think everybody understands this, that's the time especially when your emotions can get the better of you. And that's why, even though it sounds mundane, when I say the rule of law, what we've been advised by every legal counsel following us is to make sure that we're circumspect in the way that we go about this prosecutorial effort that we're undertaking and 7 committees.
I understand your point. I disagree with it. I think you can start an impeachment inquiry and still have those things happening. The other thing I'm really concerned about is the crime against humanity that's happening in our name and with our money at the south of the border. I think the child detention camps should be closed.
Couldn't agree with you more.
I remember studying the civil rights movement in my history class and thinking, what would I have done during the civil rights movement? And I don't think a good way to do that is say, trying to follow the rule of law. I think what we should try to think about is how we can disrupt the evil that is being done in our name and get into that good trouble that your honorable colleague John Lewis talks about. And Trump's actions are only going to continue to get worse the longer he's not held accountable for what his previous actions, that we know that are clearly stated in the Mueller report, have not had anything happen with. But I thank you for your time, and I know you have colleagues on the other side who don't even take the time to listen to their constituents, so I appreciate that. Thank you.
Well, and I don't. And John Lewis is one of my dear friends and one of my dear colleagues who I sit on the same committee with, who we have had long discussions about this. Long discussions. I don't want anyone in this audience to go away this evening and think that we aren't deeply offended and upset about the caging of children. Well, you say what actions? And it is frustrating that we're not in charge.
But why do you have a majority if there's not actions being? Yeah, you have more power than I do.
No, we don't. Actually, you have an awful lot of power.
I understand. But
People have an awful lot of power. And that's what with your power, you enact legislation. You take positions and you come to those conclusions, as John Lewis has on many, many occasions. And I hope to have him back up here as, well, in fact, I wish he was with me here tonight.
Yeah, Congressman, thank you for coming up here and doing this. And we all...
You might have to talk into the mic a little bit.
We all respect you, and we're thankful for you coming. I know things are heated, the nation's heated, and we're just calling for you to take action. That's all we're asking. We need leadership desperately, desperately. The penalty for doing nothing is too severe. And I know that we're all hurting, and we just want to be united, and we just want to love each other. We want a compassionate nation that's united behind strong leadership and good, smart policy. And we need that. We desperately need that if we're going to beat Donald Trump in this next election. And that's exactly what we need to do. And I know everybody's talking about impeachment. The reality is he's not going to be impeached. He's not going to be removed from office. Not this election cycle. And that's right. We do need to have an inquiry. We do need you to support having an inquiry of impeachment. But what we need more than that is to unite. We need to defeat Donald Trump in this next election. But we only do that when we have the right leadership, when we have the right people at the top. I'm in our Revolution, Central Connecticut. I'm a big supporter of Bernie Sanders. But we also need to support every Democrat that we can, because that's how we're going to win, okay? And we need to not turn our backs on each other. We need to not turn our backs on Republicans. We need to not turn our backs on independents. We're all in this country together, and we need to protect each other.
And we need to not hide behind a bunch of superdelegates.
That's true, too. The main policy that I'm trying to advocate for, the main policy I'm trying to advocate for is Medicare for all. And the reason to do that is because everybody, regardless of whether they're old or young or rich or poor, they all deserve to receive health care in this country that has the
Healthcare
best
is a human
technology,
right.
the best doctors, the best drugs, yet we still die. We die at rates that are as high as Cuba's, okay? So we all talk about how bad Cuba's healthcare system is, but the reality is our life expectancy is about the same as theirs. So we live as long. And look, I mean, if we're gonna beat Donald Trump, we need to win in the Rust Belt. We need to win on big ideas. Support Medicare for all. Why haven't you come out? Why haven't you come out and supported Medicare for all?
I told you why.
You believe in healthcare as a right. I know you do.
I do.
But we're not going to win. We're not going to win off these incremental changes that you bring up. We're going to win.
Well, I would respectfully disagree, and here's why. And I think it's pretty fundamental. And we went through this in the last election as well. People like their health care. All right.
They don't.
All right, people who have health care, or the 180 million people who haven't, a number of them feel very strongly about it. A number of unions that collectively bargain for extra health care in a position
That's
that
because
they
like to
have
maintain control over
feel
their
very
union members.
strongly about it. What I'm saying is that I think that there's a way to get there, and I think we can do it in steps. And I think the first step is a very logical one, which is to say, allow people 50 to 64-year-old to buy into the Medicare system so that everybody gets to see that, yes, this can work, and yes, that it's affordable. If you ask 180 million people to give up what they have without being clear and concrete, we saw what they were able to do with the Affordable Care Act when the president said, if you like your insurance, you can keep it. And when they find out that they can't, or they find out that that's not the case, we saw what happened. And so we lost a majority over that in the House of Representatives. So listen, I commend Bernie Sanders for what he's done in terms of raising this whole issue to a whole other level where people talk about Medicare for all and talk about what we need to do is health care as a right. It's elevated the discussion. Now we're at the level of, okay, we're at this point where we understand that health care is a right. How do we make it happen? What is it
the insurance companies. We force the insurance companies from health care, and then we go after the hospitals for gouging Medicare, for gouging all our policies, and then we go after the liability insurance on the doctors, and we bring our costs down so low that everybody's paying less in taxes, Medicare taxes, than they would ever pay in insurance premiums. I don't want public option if necessary. I want the divorce, the eviction of the insurance industry from Hartford, Connecticut, out of health care. Get out of my health care. And I'm sick of your investor profits.
His rage is justified, Congressman.
How much money did investors take in pharmaceutical profits, insurance company profits? Last year.
Excuse me, sir, there are other people here that have the microphone. If you want to stand in line with the other people, you're welcome to. Go ahead, ma'am, you have the phone.
Your insurance on my health care. I don't take meds. I don't take pharmaceuticals. You should. And I don't go to the doctor.
Go ahead, ma'am, young lady.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you for your patience.
Yeah, of course. Okay, so first and foremost, I have an immense amount of respect for you for being here and for listening to this. And I think there's a lot of anger that maybe doesn't need to be directed at you, but everyone is angry. And I have a few questions so this is like not related to what's been talked about, but you talk about how Mitch McConnell is, and you have it right there, how like there have been bills sitting in the Senate not being voted on. Would you be in favor of getting rid of the filibuster?
Absolutely.
You would be.
Well, now, this intelligent young lady has, and listen, to be honest, Democrats have favored the filibuster as well, and the cloture vote. But, and I can tell you this, when we were in the majority, and we controlled both houses, narrowly in the Senate, 547 bills passed in the House were never taken up in the Senate. The bill, and I think probably the most educated thing said tonight is what you have said about the filibuster and the cloture vote in the Senate. It has to end. It's not democratic. It doesn't help the process out. I fully agree and support you on that.
Okay. I have a couple more things. Well, which question do you want first? Gun violence or immigration?
You're pretty good. You're on a roll. Go ahead.
Okay, so I'll start with immigration because this will be a quicker question. Would you be in favor of completely decriminalizing coming across the border and repealing section, I think it's 1325?
I think we have to go to comprehensive immigration reform, which actually passed the Senate in 2013 in a bipartisan manner and was sent to the House, then controlled by the Republicans, and it wasn't taken up. I don't think that people that are fleeing their countries and coming to the United States from asylum ought to be criminalized, but by the same token, we do have to have laws on the border so that for the illicit people, which there are, and those that would do harm to the nation, there has to be laws for everyone. But by and large, with comprehensive immigration reform, we solve those problems.
So you think it like should be a misdemeanor?
Yes.
Okay. And then my next, so I was at the rally yesterday morning at the Capitol.
Yes.
I heard you speak, I heard Mayor Bronin speak, and Senator Blumenthal. I think people talked a lot about universal background checks, a ban on semi-automatic assault rifles, things like that. And then, well, I know Mayor Bronin did this, she threw in urban gun violence. He talked about urban gun violence, and he said it has to stop. He says we're working for it to stop, but I haven't really seen specific things being proposed to help with urban gun violence. And I'm just wondering, what do you think we can do? Because I go to these vigils and I see like kids my age, like people who are in high school, and they've seen the dead bodies, like they've seen the people being killed, and I can't imagine it.
Well, I think there's a number of things that could be done, and I think the mayor also, well, he didn't come out with specific proposals. He talked about the licensing of manufacturers, and also you might have heard him, he used I forget whether it was him or another speaker who used Rahm Emanuel, the mayor of Chicago, saying why Chicago's rates are far different than New York's. He said, because they're next to Connecticut and New Jersey where they enforce laws. You need national laws across all 50 states that prevent the trafficking of these guns. It's a pervasive problem that is going to need a comprehensive solution. And we'd be happy to share with you all the proposals that are out there and exist in the House of Representatives. I talked about 3 yesterday because those are the 3 that have passed and are sitting on Mitch McConnell's desk. But there are several others still going through the process that are in the respective committees that have to be voted on and then taken up. But thank you for both attending the rally yesterday and for coming here tonight. What grade are you in?
I'm going to be a sophomore.
This is the future of the country, and this is why anytime that we have a forum like this, and listen, I forget, one of the people came up and said, we're not necessarily angry at you, but people are angry and frustrated, and you know what? I'm their representative. So they have every right to be as angry at me as anyone else, and they're frustrated because they want to see things happen. They want to see something done, and it is thoroughly frustrating. And yet, no matter who's in the position, you're going to go through the rule of law and the process. So I'm glad. And the way that change comes about is through the persistence of citizens who come out and attend this. The gun violence changes, et cetera. We all thought that things would change dramatically after they murdered our children in Sandy Hook. And nothing changed. You know how frustrating that is to people. 7 years later, the House finally passes universal background checks, which in and of itself isn't a panacea, but at least it shows that people were listening, and at least it's a step in the right direction, and Congress had to vote. So that's why I continue to put the pressure on the other body, in this case the Senate, but specifically in Mitch McConnell. And you're right about their arcane rules. I'm sure that Senator Murphy and Senator Blumenthal would agree with me and agree with you on those rules as well, because these are the kinds of things that have to take place. And when you see people is it any wonder why people are upset when you see kids in cages? And that's the action of the President of the United States. Yeah, I said earlier, elections have consequences. They do. And so now there's going to be another election as well. And there's ongoing investigations. And there's ongoing inquiries. And they're happening at multiple levels. Are they happening at the pace and the speed of social media and the nightly news? No. They never have. And that's not the way that the process works. That is frustrating too. I get that. But it is what we're working with. And in the end, justice will prevail. Thank you. Great job.
Hi, I have 2 questions for you. One domestic policy, one foreign. So you have talked a lot about how we should be voting and how we should be taking action in politics, and we should really just work harder to get the things passed that we've done. But you have said that on healthcare, you would want to pass small incremental changes like Medicare for America, even though 72% of Americans, or 70% of Americans say they support Medicare for all, and a new poll said that 52% of Republicans support Medicare for all, and almost every other developed country.
Yes, they do. They support the concept, and then you ask them, how it will be carried out, and once you get into the details of it, because the same thing, I support the concept of Medicare for all. I support the fact that health care is a right. I believe that. The question is then, Well, how do you get there? Meaning, how do you put that into law? How does that actually work? And that's a little bit more difficult. And once you do that, and I think in all the polls, they would also show that, then it's a little bit, it becomes a little bit different in terms of, they also say a lot of people don't want to give up their own insurance. They want to maintain their docs and their hospitals.
One-tier system.
Excuse me, you've had a chance to speak. I'm sorry, this gentleman is very rude. Would you let the child speak? Would you let this young man speak? You've had an opportunity. You didn't wait in line. Then get in line. How about a little respect for your fellow citizens that are here? Go ahead.
I want to respect their intelligence. Their intelligence is
Don't respond to him. He's only going to keep it up.
Ask your question.
His intelligence.
Okay.
Take your time.
No, I forgot what I was going to say.
It's okay. Take a breath.
Happens to me frequently.
Oh, right. Well, almost every other developed nation on Earth has managed to implement some form of universal health care system.
They have.
And we are the richest country in the history of the world, and we somehow are not able to implement that. So why can't we implement? So I think. Got it.
Well, you're right on all of those facts.
But so my question is, why do you believe we need to go through small incremental changes? Why do you believe we need to do small incremental changes instead of large, comprehensive policies that the majority of Americans want and support and every other country on earth can do?
When I said small, it's small in comparison to changing the complete system that you're operating under right now. And by that I mean that you would not only be changing the system, you would have to change 180 million people.
Who don't like their health care.
Well, respectfully, I don't think that that's the entire picture. That I don't think there's a lot of problems with the healthcare system, but a lot of people like the healthcare they have.
People like their doctors. They don't care about who's providing their health insurance. They like their doctors, and they want to be able to afford.
And their doctors in their hospitals like to get paid too. So what happens is, when you break it down and say, how will you pay for this? That's where the problems come. But you're thinking along the right lines. You're thinking clearly, you're thinking broadly, and in your time and in your generation, you're going to see this happen. But there might have to be a couple of incremental steps first, I would suggest. But, that's what makes a democracy. People have different opinions, and then you have to submit those ideas before a body, and they get to vote on them. And the good news, with Democrats in control, is that there'll also be a debate, as there is currently that we're having amongst presidential candidates, who some think that there should be Medicare for all, some don't. They all believe in universal health care. They all believe that we ought to get there. It's just there's a different way of arriving at the same decision.
Does your stance on health care have anything to do with the $75,000 you've accepted from the insurance industry?
No, it doesn't. I owned an insurance agency. There's 60,000 employees in the insurance industry in the state of Connecticut. It's a very value-added business. And so I represent those people in the United States Congress and all their families, 60,000 of them, in a district of 750,000 people. Just like I represent Pratt & Whitney Aircraft. And yes, they have donated to my campaigns as well. But it's fully disclosed, which is why I didn't even know that, but you did. But it should be fully disclosed so that people can say, well, let's take a look at that guy, which is why we want Trump to disclose his records, so that we'll have an opportunity to take a look at it, and people will make up their own minds about where citizens stand with regard to how they're influenced or not.
Okay, I'll move on to my second question. The House recently voted to condemn the BDS movement against Israel. What is your stance on Israeli settlements and Benjamin Netanyahu?
I'm not a big fan of Mr. Netanyahu's, and I am very concerned about the expansion of settlements.
Thank you.
But I support the state of Israel, and I support what they stand for in the Middle East. I support how they are oftentimes all alone and our strongest ally in the Middle East as well.
Come on.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, I do. Wait, excuse me, sir. Gentlemen, you have the floor.
Thank you for coming out, Congressman. I appreciate it. Some across the aisle don't even bother. Doesn't mean I agree with you. I have two quick questions. One is, do you know what the carbon dioxide proportion is in the atmosphere today?
I'm sorry, I can't.
Percentage of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere today. Do you know what it is? Parts per million.
Do I know the what? I can't hear what you're saying. Can you step up to the mic?
Carbon dioxide.
What about it?
Do you know what the percentage is from the emissions today in parts per million?
Do I know what parts per million from carbon dioxide are emitted into the environment? Off the top of my head, I do not.
It's 415 parts per million.
Okay.
It was 405 last spring. So your Social Security Act is great, 2100, but will not mean anything if you don't address climate change. Because, here's why. Because there are projections that starting with 2050, if you don't tackle this problem today, your GDP is going to start going down because of climate-related losses. So you have to address that no matter what. And we are the insurance capital, so you know where that goes. The second
Well,
part.
I had the opportunity to serve with Jay Inslee in the United States Congress. I had the opportunity to work with him on legislation in Congress.
Do you support the Green New
I had the opportunity to put forward a carbon tax proposal.
It's not going to do much, unfortunately.
Well,
That's just a fact. I'm a data-driven
that's not
guy.
according to the scientists and to the economists that I talk to. But you may have a different point of view on that.
I do. I think we need bolder action. That's all. Okay, the second piece. This is a yes or no question. I have read the Muller report. I've listened to it on an audiobook format while driving during my morning and evening commute. The facts are very clear. Personally, I'm not saying the rule of law should be subverted. Let that process go ahead. That's fine. No problem there. But personally, do you support impeachment? Do you want to be with the majority of the office that supports impeachment today. And the second thing I want to say is, please don't take your democratic support for granted. Please don't. Personally, I'm only donating to candidates who are women and who don't take PAC money. So on impeachment, all I want to know is personally, are you for it or against it? It's a yes or no question.
I'm sorry, I had a hard time understanding a lot of what you were saying to begin with, but I think it boils down to impeachment, are you for it or against it?
Yes.
I'm in favor of going forward in the process and through the inquiry according to the rule of law and let the facts and the data speak for themselves.
So the facts and data is already there in the
Now,
Muller
wait a
report,
second.
right?
Now, wait a second.
Okay.
Excuse me. Excuse me. The studies are still ongoing in every single committee.
Okay, that'll go on. But what do you say to those people who are facing the impacts of what the president is doing every day, using mass media to basically instigate racial violence and hatred? That against a subset of American citizens who he has taken an oath to defend and protect. He's violating his oath of office. Is that not reason enough for impeachment?
The jury will never convict them. The jury is essential.
I think the president's behavior on many levels, and I wear this pin and I wear it proudly because it reminds me every day of how one should conduct themselves in the office of the president. To say that President Trump has demeaned the office, does not carry on with the decorum and with his daily tweets is an understatement. Yeah. But we still have a rule of law that we have to go through and abide by, and I will do that.
Nobody is asking you to go around that. All I'm saying is there are other representatives who are in districts that were flipped, who have come out for impeachment, yet you are in a safe district and having trouble simply
Being in a safe district has nothing to do with it.
So how
Being
hard
in a
is it?
safe district gives all the more reason why you should be painstakingly making sure that the decisions that you arrive at are thoroughly vetted and substantiated through the committee process. It's not just that, why do we have a system of justice if you're not going to abide by what the rules call for you to abide by?
Nobody said you had to bypass the rules.
Well,
That's all I'm saying.
apparently,
I'm just disappointed with your response, but that's fine. It's a difference of opinion.
I just let me say, I think, as I don't know how many times that we can say that the inquiry is ongoing and in the committee process. I don't know how many more times I can say that. Go ahead, sir.
Couple of things. First, somebody mentioned before how terrible the healthcare system in Cuba was and how it was far inferior to our own. That's incorrect. Number one.
Speaking to the mic, I can't hear you, let alone people there.
Somebody had mentioned, and I just want to correct the record, somebody had mentioned that Cuba's healthcare system was not good. In fact, it was far worse than ours. Well, that's untrue. The Cuban healthcare system actually has a better child mortality outcome than the United States does. As a matter of fact, the age limit or how old people get to be is far exceeding that of the United States, as male life expectancy is declining as we speak. So I just wanted to correct the record on that. Secondly, the deranged clown that we have in the White House, the rule of law did not go south with him. It began way before Mr. Trump. So I'm not a Trump supporter, but the truth needs to be known. The rule of law has been denigrated ever since the 80s, and certainly went into hyperdrive in the 90s and 2000 with the bank failures and all the criminality that initiated that and engendered that outcome. And we are suffering now for it. Now, somebody mentioned before what your reason for not supporting House Bill number 1384, which is single payer. And that's a really good question. And I'd like to expand on that, because I'm wondering if there's any direct correlation in your reticence in backing H.R. 1384, based on the fact that 54% of your total PAC money for the 2017-2018 election cycle was from the insurance, finance, and health industries. Now, we're not talking 75 grand here. Okay, let's be clear on that. That's a good start, 75,000, but that's not the total. The total was $625,000.50. And I'm just wondering if there's any correlation to your reticence in supporting a health care plan that has proved successful throughout the world. And we spoke about this before 3 years ago in Southington, and you said, how would you like to be responsible for having 44,000 people lose their jobs? The point is that with the H.R. 1384, 2.6 million jobs would be generated from that healthcare system, okay? So my question to you is there any correlation between the $625,000 you received from health insurance industry, healthcare industry, and finance have anything to do
I think
with
you've made up your mind already, haven't you?
No, I'm asking you the question.
I think you've made up your mind already, haven't
Mr.
you?
Larson, I certainly have.
Yes, all right, so.
And there's no proof of a quid pro quo. I understand that as well. I'm just asking you, do you sense any correlation?
I'll let my
yourself?
record of public service stand for itself. I'll let my record of support on a number of healthcare-related
Specifically
issues.
about one of the most important issues of the day.
Right.
That's what I'm talking about. Not your past record. That's fine. I really appreciate the work you've done on Social Security and a couple of other items. But I'm talking about something that's rather huge. And that's what I'm addressing right now. And I'm asking you, is there any correlation?
And I'm saying to you, as clear as I can, no.
Thank you.
So much better job than me. Why would I ever want to even open my mouth? Thank you.
Good evening, Representative Larson. My name is George A. Wu. I live in Wethersfield, and we've had contact in the past.
We have.
I have no questions or no comments. I don't want a thing. A couple of thoughts come to me as I sat here tonight. Democracy is a very messy process. There's no doubt about that. People sometimes seem to think that you can impeach, or you can do this, or you can do that. There's negotiation is required on all levels, and it doesn't always work right. And the people that are saying, why don't you impeach tonight? Why should you impeach if the damn jury's going to exonerate him and turn him loose? That doesn't make any sense at all. I think my counsel to you is, I agree with Mrs. Pelosi's approach. Go slow, investigate, get the facts, and get the American people to not to want something done that's irrational and unthinking and done precipitously, okay? I don't want, as far as I'm concerned, I don't want anything from my government anymore. I believe that looking around this audience tonight, I'm probably kind of unique. I doubt if there are too many people here that are over 93 and a half years old. And if they are, they all left already because they don't have my energy.
I was going to say, I hope I...
And the other thing is, I put my line, I happen to be a veteran of World War II. I saw combat, I saw the concentration camps, I saw the smell and the stink of what Mr. Trump has done. And there's only one objective that I have in my mind on this election, is dump Trump. And anything that you do that deflects from that particular point of focus about, I want more money here, I want more money here. I want the insurance companies out of my insurance. None of that's going to happen. You people here and the American people are really living through the fall of the Roman Empire. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Congressman Larson, for being here tonight and speaking with all of us. I want to shed a little bit of light on a topic you touched upon briefly earlier,
Okay.
and that's student loan debt. As you know,
I'm sorry, what? Go ahead. Student loan debt?
Student
Yeah,
loan debt.
Please.
As you know, there we go. As you know, it impacts millions of Americans and thousands here in Connecticut. The American dream for everyone has always been to own your own home, a peaceful little place to raise your family and put your head at night. However, this dream has become unattainable for so many Americans, both young and old, because of the crushing student loan debt we face. Student loan debt, as I'm sure you know, has surpassed $1.6 billion and is well on its way to $1.7 trillion. One of the single biggest barriers that prevents young adults like myself from obtaining the ability to purchase a home is our student loan debt. Recently, Senator Elizabeth Warren from Massachusetts introduced the Student Loan Debt Relief Act, a bill that would help millions of struggling families achieve financial stability. If our government can find $700 billion for the Emergency Economic Stabilization Act in 2008, and $80 billion, almost $80 billion, to bail out the auto industry, why can't we do the same for everyday Americans? Thank you. My friends and I worked multiple jobs through our college days. We went to state schools. We tried to keep up with the interest that was occurring on our student loan debt, and we watched our parents sacrifice and do whatever they could so that we didn't have to suffer and that we could all make our ends meet. We did our part. We are now asking our elected officials to do the same. I applaud your commitment to education. You're an educator. I applaud your stance on expanding the GI Bill for public service. I think public service to our country is a great thing, and I commend everyone who's worn the uniform for our country here tonight. My question to you, Congressman Larson, do you support the Student Loan Debt Relief Act? And if not,
Yes.
You do?
Yes.
And what are you going to do to make sure that that gets through Congress? I know we're experiencing gridlock and everything in the Senate right now, but what are you going to do personally?
Well,
to help push that legislation forward?
I can do is say that I believe it will get through the House of Representatives. I cannot guarantee, that Mitch McConnell will take it up, which is when we were talking earlier about why elections matter and what matters in the Senate is making sure that we have a Senate that would be receptive to whether it's universal background checks or student loan debt forgiveness or increasing the minimum wage or making sure that there's equal pay for equal work. We pass all these things in the House of Representatives, and then the Senate takes no action. So the young lady who got up before and was talking about cloture and was talking about the filibuster probably have one of the key questions of the evening, because without that kind of reform in the Senate, it's going to be very difficult to get legislation through. They do something that's called an omnibus bill or a continuing resolution and very little else.
Thank you for your time.
You're welcome, but thank you. And that who is the lead sponsor in the House of Senator Warren's bill?
I'm not sure.
We'll find that out, but I commend her as well for, I think it's important to run for office, but I think it's also important to have a plan and lay out your plan as to how that will work and what its impact is. What I was trying to explain earlier in the night with all of our legislation that we've offered is that we also have a plan to pay for it as to not to burden future generations, but how things will actually be paid for. And that sometimes escapes people, but it's vitally important to future generations as well as current generations. Thank you.
Hi, Representative Larson. My name is Howard Deshevsky.
Thank you for being here, Howard.
Thank you for coming this evening. It's pretty much I guess people reach a consensus that we have a president who is a racist or was espoused racist ideology, white supremacy. But in all fairness to Donald Trump, it hasn't begun with him, and it won't end with him. This white supremacy, white nationalist ideology, and I think as a country, if we go back to the original sin of slavery, and as a teacher, also it's something that working with children, we talk about slavery, Jim Crow, racial discrimination, and it's something that African Americans have been catching hell for a number of years. And one of your colleagues, Representative Lee, in the House has sponsored a bill, I think it's H.R. 40, to recommend a commission to both study and make recommendations in terms of reparations for African Americans. I want to know if you've signed on to as a co-sponsor.
I actually signed on to the Jim Clyburn bill, which I think is a little, he calls it 10-20-30, which I think, first of all, I think you said it very well, the original sin. And what Jim Clyburn said in his legislation is, so how do we get back to the original sin and how do you trace it? It does require a study, but I think once the study is concluded, then where will those funds go? And how would you determine that? Wouldn't it be better to set it up so that 10% went to furtherance of education or better housing conditions and better health care, so that he labels it, I may be getting them in reverse order or whatever, but I do think that that's one of the ways that would be very constructive and I think makes sense, and also does require us to go through a very thorough study of it.
So that's going to require a lot of work, and I think educating the public as well as some persuasion, and so you see yourself being out there and once some recommendations are developed.
Yes, well, I do think, I feel very strongly that, you know, as a former history teacher, that these are the kinds of things that the public has to face. But then when you say, okay, what's the remedy? Let's make sure that we also have a very logical way where this can go forward and help and assist. And also, as a history, people forget. People forget. We were at the rally yesterday, and I asked Kevin Lynch from West Hartford, very knowledgeable guy who follows us. I says, Kev, were you aware that the House of Representatives have passed 3 bills and they were sitting in the Senate? Most people were not. And because oftentimes that information doesn't get out there. I mean, the reason behind a town hall like this is so that you can educate. And education is a two-way thing. You're educating me as well as hopefully I'm passing on to you the information and the rationale as to why I come to the conclusions that I have.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Good evening again, Congressman Larson, Bob Light from East Windsor, Connecticut.
Good to see you again, Bob.
As you well know, when I speak with you and not to you, I speak from the other side of the aisle.
I know that.
I feel blessed that I have the same kind of relationship with you that I've had for several years now with Senator Saudonoir, and that's to be able to agree to disagree.
Right.
And that comes out of a mutual respect. Now to the points.
Yeah.
First of all, from the point of a sportsman, a safe and responsible gun owner, and that's in regard to universal background checks. I'm wholeheartedly for the most stringent background checks we can possibly get, and will do what I can to lobby the U.S. senators outside the state of Connecticut to see that they
90% of Americans agree. You're
try and
right.
understand that. And as I think I heard you say that you think Trump's on board with that as well.
I do.
One of the things that you brought up at the East Granby Forum was that he was also on board with your Social Security bill. Is that still true?
Well, because I try to be fair at all of these forums, what he did is he stood up to 16 other Republicans and said it's not an entitlement, that it's a earned benefit and that he would not cut it. And so what that means is when you look at our proposal, there's only really two ways that you can go to save Social Security: cut benefits or increase what people are going to pay. That's what it comes down to at the end of the day. And he took the more difficult stand in the middle of a debate. So I give him credit for that.
Now, to go on a little bit from the sportsman side, and then we tie it into the military side and the veteran side of this whole thing about arms. I'm not sure that by outlawing assault weapons, how you're going to govern that, how you're going to enforce it. The whole thing is mind-boggling to me, because back in the days when I was out hunting in the woods, I never carried an AK-47 or an
Right.
AR-15. From the military standpoint, I'm a veteran. I'm a veterans service officer. And more so than recently, a lot of my clients I'm helping deal with, helping to try and get help from the VA that are dealing with PTSD. The same problem exists in the world of terror. We need, and I ask you to do what you can with whatever committee is in charge of it. We need some big help with the mental health wellness program.
We do.
And we need it budgeted, and we needed it to be enforced, and when it's budgeted, we need to see that it goes to the right place, and that's all about the right kind of people.
Couldn't agree with you more.
Thank you.
Go ahead, ma'am.
Representative Larson, thank you for coming.
You've been very patient. Thank you.
Thank you. Talking points for this evening, I just wanted to mention the environment. I'm concerned about the environment and climate change, the weakening of the Endangered Species Act, the exploitation of the national parks, and I'm wondering what the plan is for the Democrats to address some of this. And I realize that we can't really do anything until the Republicans and President Trump are replaced, but what is the plan? Because the exploitation of the national parks for drilling and the weakening of the EPA, we have no hand, we have no power here now.
Well, it's the same thing from everything from the Paris Peace Accords and to our position in terms of standing up to the president on that. We should have a handout for you that will go through a list of the things that we're currently undertaking, which includes a number of which you've already enumerated, including what's going on in our national parks as well. And primarily, the main issue here is the denial of science. The denial of science as the final arbitrator, but not only the denial of science, but also what our military has said overwhelmingly in terms of the number one threat that we face because of what it causes in terms of the discord around the world that will happen because of living in the aftermath of climate change.
So we need to vote them out, basically. Thank you.
Thank you.
Welcome home, John.
Yeah, good to be back.
How you doing?
Good.
You must have known you were going to get yelled at tonight, right?
No, you know, listen, that's part of the job. Part of the job of representing people is that they have a right to their opinions and they have a right to their concerns, and they want to let their elected representatives know them, and in no uncertain terms.
I've never been bashful, John. Listen, I got a couple of things. I know that you're not on the committees that are doing the hearings. My request, if you can communicate to them, because I don't have a way to do that directly, make all those hearings public.
Well, they are.
Well, I don't mean just the results. I mean,
No, the
they
hearing.
drag these people in. I don't want any non-public hearings.
Under Democratic control, all of those hearings are public.
I mean, the truth of the matter is, unless the criminal in the White House gets out there to the general public, the support for impeachment is not going to happen. I understand, but I understand the reluctance to voting for impeachment and even after the hearings and sending it to the Senate knowing that you'd be lucky if Mitch McConnell would come to the vote at all. You know, Morning Joe, who used to be a Republican, gave him the best nickname ever, Moscow Mitch. I don't know if, and I don't know because, you know, I'm not a practicing politician anymore. I don't know, but I'm pretty sure that if we could organize the Secretary of States in the entire country to sue Mitch McConnell because he will not put protection for our voting machines and voting rights on the floor. He won't even let it come up. And I'm not sure that we can actually impeach the majority leader in the Senate, but we probably ought to. We have two enemies. We have the enemy in the White House and the enemy of the majority leader in the Senate. But we've been attacked by the Russians. And now the president has said he'll listen to anybody who wants to help him. There's no doubt in my mind as a Marine that he's committed treason. And that, you know the punishment as well as I do. It's firing squad or hanging. Now, I agree with your leader in the House. I'd rather see him in jail than just impeached. If he loses the election or if he does get removed from office, he is going to end up in jail. I have a copy of the Muller report. I'd like to see the unredacted parts, but I have the summary as well as the public, and I've read all of it. This is a criminal in the White House. And I don't think there's any way to put it. And I don't think anybody in this room is going to argue with you. Now, I'm a proud Democrat, have been for a long time. I still have this sign from your first run for Congress. In my garage, I put it out every 2 years. I'm not going to make you spend money on signs. We can do this, but I would like to say to everybody here, we are the United States of America. I have a few pet peeves. I have not heard you do that. People say America, meaning the United States. What I loved about our former President Obama is he talked about that not blue states, we are the United States of America. And for anybody who doesn't understand, Mexico is in North America. Canada is in North America. America begins at the Arctic Circle and ends with Tierra del Fuego. And North America ends with that tiny little country with the little thing where we built that canal. And South America begins there. And I'd like Al to pass it on. When you mean the United States of America, because it means much more when we refer to ourselves as the United States of America. We are one people. I don't care what your skin color is, what your ancestry is. If you want to argue ancestries, my first two ancestors came in 1620 and 1630. I'm very proud that Elliot Richardson is a distant cousin of mine. I'm not all that proud of President Pierce because he's a nice guy. But I'm descended from Ezekiel Richardson. So we've been here a long time. Yeah, actually, Barbara Bush is related to our family, so I was going to leave that out of that, you know. But the truth of the matter is it doesn't matter when we got here. And my first ancestors came without permission. They weren't nice to the people who were here. They stole from them, and in some cases, they killed them. They intended to change their religious ideas. As a good Irishman, you understand when you came to New England, it wasn't always easy.
It's true.
Right. But we need to stop that. We are the United States of America, and we are all citizens. If we're not citizens, and we're in line to get citizens. And I taught, as you know, I taught Latin American history as well as U.S. government and political science. People, the island of Puerto Rico, when President Trump went down there and threw those paper towels at him, if I was down there in Puerto Rico, I'd have lit him on fire and thrown him back. But we need to stand up for our fellow citizens. And I know that there's still a vote to go as to whether to move forward with an impeachment or not. I'm hoping that you will add your name to that list. Beyond that, I'll put your sign out. And welcome home.
Always good to be back. Thank you.
But you knew you were going to get yelled at. Take care, John.
Good evening, Congressman. You've earned your raise today. I want to comment on the Social Security. Made it a hobby to study. I've made it a hobby to study it over a 40-year period. The Republican proposal is not even worth discussing, but I'm really dismayed and hope to educate as to a thought process as to the proposal on the Democrat side. What it does now, as it is it puts an even growing burden on the lower income worker and the lower income workers' employers, which is already very onerous. You think about what someone pays for Social Security if you're making $20,000, $30,000 a year. And what I think has been missed is, rather than look at just two ways, there's a third way to look at it. And that is, especially if you want to make Social Security a benefit which is larger and even more irrelevant to what someone has paid in through their employer and themselves, that instead of making an ever larger burden on those already burdened, say, wait a second, given the entirety, given the fact that, in fact, the Social Security Fund and the federal budget have already been intermingling funds for many years, that instead of having all this burden being heaped on the worker and his employer, that it be a tax that goes on all forms of income so that there's less, because what you have in there now, what the Democrats have in there now, especially with artificial intelligence and robotics, this destroys jobs and undermines job creation. And I get the feeling that no one has really thought out the unconsidered consequences of having this kind of proposal go forward.
Well, actually, they have, and actually, it's been viewed as the #1 civil rights issue, the #1 women's issue, and the #1 economic development issue. Because when you look at the amount of money that comes from Social Security into every single congressional district, when you look at what happens in terms of both raising people out of poverty levels, and yes, it is a progressive approach, but to go to approach of taxation where you get the source from other sources that are giving, even though people at higher levels are not nearly going to receive what people at lower levels are going to receive under Social Security, the concept of Roosevelt was to make sure that you paid into an earned benefit system so it could not be detailed as an entitlement or a welfare state, but as something that people have actually paid for.
Mr. Congressman, and I say this respectfully, but after doing a lot of research, and I don't know how much legal research you've done, but reading the Helvering decision, the Fleming versus Nestor, reading the Affordable Care Act Supreme Court decision, where they called what that is a tax, if you went to any objective, neutral person, they would tell you that Social Security is a tax, and in fact, the Internal Revenue Service itself, if you look at topic 751, which is published by the Social Security Administration, this is their work, they call it a tax. By any definitional standard, they could call it insurance as a title, they could call it whatever they want. It is a tax. So what I would ask is that you submit this to an objective, neutral party and see what you get as feedback from that. The last thing I want to say, though, because especially with the venom that's flowed today, and that is, I think everyone should know that in 1964-65, monumental civil rights legislation was passed, and it was passed in the Senate. And every senator who voted for that and who was still in office 7 years later when Richard Russell, who adamantly led the fight against all civil rights legislation, every single senator who voted for it, they voted for the Senate office building to be named after Russell. And that's because as much as people want to be judgmental and be vicious and define people by any one thing, as Paul Newman once said in Absence of Malice to Sally Field's character, sometimes the truth isn't out there just like that. And when Daniel Crenshaw said in response to his being vilified on Saturday Night Live, we have to become a people who are less easily offended.
Thank you.
Hello, Congressman Larson. My name's Pete. I'm from Sullyton. It's my second time coming to your town halls, and I find it very educational and very entertaining. A lot of people are very upset, and I kind of understand that. The question is, I think a lot of people don't really understand the process of why stuff is kind of going on. So I'll try to explain it to me. You're a teacher, so kind of think of me as like a really bad student from civics class. I did read the Mueller report. If anybody who hasn't, it's really good. It's like a spy novel, believe it or not. But the Mueller report basically said that if he wasn't president, he would be indicted for obstruction of justice. And the penalties, if he got convicted on all 10, would be 20 years in prison, which I thought was amazing reading the report. So knowing that, and that everybody else sort of knows there's 10 corruption stuff, the process of the impeachment stuff, because everybody wants you to impeach, and if you have that decision close to your chest, I really respect that, because from what I'm thinking in my civics classes a long time ago, that you can't open an impeachment hearing. That's by the Justice Department. So the Justice Department is trying to get the facts that you want, and then they're going to make a decision whether to open an impeachment inquiry and all. So the problem is for me is I think a lot of people are upset with the Judiciary Committee because they are not opening an impeachment inquiry, because all the stuff you're talking about in the courts and whether you can get stuff and whether you cannot get stuff, I think if you open the impeachment inquiry, the law would allow you to get all that information that you want. And I think the Speaker of the House doesn't want to do that because one is very political and it just wipes up the 40% of the Trump people and all. But then if they do vote on impeachment in the Judiciary Committee, then you have the opportunity to vote for an impeachment. And then when that happens, it goes to the Senate and it sits on Mitch McConnell's desk for now. So a question to me is, one, am I correct on that process? And two is, if you're looking for more facts, and the Mueller report is kind of everybody's basics of what the facts are for the impeachment inquiry, what other facts are you looking for? Are you looking for a campaign finance laws violation due to paying off a porn star and a Playboy model? And you're going to have an impeachment inquiry that has not just an obstruction of justice, but a campaign finance law violation. You're going to put them, they're thinking about putting them all together. Is that why they need more time? Or they're just kind of trying to politically try to move this where you're trying to get what you want, but you're not trying to go through the political painstaking process of opening an impeachment inquiry. And then the second thing I want to say is the 160 days. I didn't know that, and I think a lot of people don't know that. The question is, why don't we know that? Why isn't every Democrat that goes on the press, Fox News, MSNBC, CNN, any media outlet should be up there? Either Democrats or moderate Republicans should be going up and say, you know what, we talked about this tragedy, what happened in El Paso, but that universal background check, yeah, we passed it 160 days ago. Mitch McConnell's on his desk, and he has a soldier injury, so he's not going back to Washington. He fell a couple weeks ago.
So let me ask you, if you were the media, what would be more interesting for you to cover?
Well, the question is
the point I'm trying to make is that I think what happens in the media is that doesn't become, that's not as exciting as citing differences. And it's better, it's far more interesting, instead of talking about, well, how are these inquiries going forward? How do they come to a conclusion? How do you gather all the information? Isn't it better to talk about the fight between Nancy Pelosi and members of her own caucus?
I totally understand.
Isn't that a more exciting thing to talk about? And if you were to ask the members of the caucus, they would say they're not in a fight with her. People have arrived at their own conclusions. And in large part, let's be honest about it also, because their constituents are very upset, and they've been clamoring and saying, hey, look, we want to see this impeachment. And they're very upset about it. I understand the frustration. I just believe, and maybe it's the history teacher in me, I believe that you have to go through this process. And I think in going through the process, everyone is going to benefit even more. The president is entitled, he doesn't think so, but he's entitled to everybody going through this process. You opened up by saying everyone said that were he not president, right?
Well, that's what
That's right,
the Mueller
but-
report
but-
said on TV too.
Yes, but he is
I
president. But this is, no, I want to make this point. I make this point because that's what Alan Dershowitz says. And when I say legal people have advised us, I'm talking about our counsel saying, be careful of how you frame these issues going forward. Even members that have come out for impeachment are also being very cautious, I think, about making sure that we gather the information and the data, and there's nothing that's stopping anything other than the inability to get witnesses. Now, the Muller testimony, again, the second time, not as compelling as I think a lot of people thought it might be, and yet also very revealing. And everyone said, well, that's it. The opinion maker said it's done, it's not going to happen, it's not going anywhere. That hasn't been the case at all. If anything, it's sped up and everybody's intensified. And in the meantime, other committees have stepped up because all their parts to the puzzle are starting to fit in. As I've said, I think, several times tonight, the Judiciary Committee is where the responsibility lies. That committee and their chairman are going through this process. That inquiry is going forward. It's going to happen, but it's going to happen not at the speed of social media, but it's going to happen at the speed of the committee process. I get it. That's frustrating, but that's the way I honestly, truthfully believe that I think we're far better off by doing that and being circumspect. That's what the legal counsel who advises the Ways and Means Committee on which I sit has gone forward and said that that's how we should proceed.
Isn't an impeachment inquiry would get the witnesses to come forward instead of exhuming executive privilege? From like McGahn was gonna post to fire Mueller, or I'm just kind of curious of like all the roadblocks that the executive branch is doing to prevent you from getting.
I think that only makes the case stronger against the president. But the point that I was going to make, and I disagree with Dershowitz, but Dershowitz says under Article 2, the president has these authorities. He's granted them under the Constitution. And all I'm pointing out is that there are other sides that are working counterintuitive to how people in this audience might feel this evening. So all the more reason, I think, to make sure that we're circumspect in going after the truth.
Well, the thing is, Article 2, yeah, that's, well, according to President Trump, that's kind of true. He's head of the executive branch. But Article 1 of the Constitution for Congress has the ability to check, investigate, and impeach what he does with
Exactly.
Article 2.
Great point.
That is against the law.
So you have, and so now, that's a great point, and I wish I had made this earlier. So you have Article 1,
It's on TV.
Article 1, right? You have the responsibility of the House and the Senate. You have the responsibility of Congress. Article 2, you have the president. Who will be the final arbiter?
Well, if it's a...
The courts.
If the court
And so
orders
what
an
happens is,
impeachment,
as is the case on some instances already, I know that the Ways and Means Committee has already prevailed in 3 cases because we've listened to what our legal counsel has told us. And what they've told us specifically is that you can't go out and call for impeachment when it goes before the courts, because one of the first things that they'll say is, was it politically motivated?
So you based on.
No, what I'm
No,
saying,
saying
no,
it's
that's
based-
not what I'm,
no,
what I'm
what the
saying is,
Mueller report said,
you
you need more
can't,
stuff.
you shouldn't prejudge. You should ask for the information.
I agree with that. I'm just saying is that, do you need more information from the Mueller report?
We need all the information. And so that's why the Judiciary Committee has asked for the unredacted version. That's why we've asked for his finances on the Ways and Means Committee.
So what I kind of said is kind of how the process works. I just want to make that kind of, not that I'm trying to be.
Well, let me say
that the process, that's how that process is working.
It is. That's how the process
So
is.
I understand everybody in this room now should kind of understand why you're not sitting here with the gavel saying, well, impeach the son of a.
My guess is probably not, but, but,
I'll call this as a moderate person or an independent that's sort of in the middle, I can understand that view. And so I really appreciate you explaining that to me in a nice, calm manner and it's quiet.
that's our job.
Thank you, sir.
Hi.
How are you?
Good. I'm Gretchen from West Hartford. Might be losing my progressive bona fides in a second. As somebody who believed that Trump was impeachable the second he took the oath of office because of the emoluments clause, and who thinks in the end he should be impeached even if the Senate is not going to throw him out of office, and the sooner he's out, the better off we are. I also see that you sometimes have to be careful what you ask for. So if he is removed from office, President Pence could no, well, not just run for it. No. He would become the president, and he could forgive him. Right? So that's a possibility, and that's not all right. So then he could be tried on the state level. The other thing is that if you take more time to go through the process carefully and come up with more evidence that could even upset his followers, which kind of blows my mind. I don't think that would happen. But it is at least a possibility that if you follow all of the evidence and gather enough, you might actually have enough to convince the Senate to convict.
Correct. That's what a number of people think. Yes, sir.
Good evening, sir. Thank you for staying late talking with us. I was in Congress in July for the lung cancer summit. I don't know if you were there participating. Is this on? Thank you, sir. Appreciate you staying late. I was recently attending Congress in July, talking with them face-to-face about the lung cancer summit that took place with the GO2 Foundation. I don't know if you were a part of that or not, but I understand you're on the Lung Cancer Caucus?
Yes.
Yes, sir. I want to thank you for that participation. I had recently lost my wife to lung cancer, and I was wondering,
Take your time. Take your time.
I was wondering if you could shed some light on why the $20 million for funding in the DOD hasn't been restored since '09, and that's what we've been trying to get done for many years. And with her passing, I mean, I'm here in her honor trying to figure that out. Do you have any idea why that hasn't taken place?
Why?
The $20 million that's been appropriated within the DOD in the CDMRP.
No, but I'll tell you what, we'd be happy to sit down with you and talk this through and see what we can do to assist you and your family. And
Yes, it's HR 6022. I think you're familiar with that bill. It's the Women and Lung Cancer Research and Preventive Service Act of 2019. I understand it's coming up for a vote when you guys reconvene. And if you're not yet a co-sponsor, please consider. I'd love to sit down and talk with you, maybe in your office
Well,
sometime.
we welcome that, and we certainly have our support on that.
Do you think it's going to be hard to get leadership on board to have it passed?
No, I don't.
So with regards to the House, you think it may pass?
If it will pass the House,
Correct.
I can't say that it will pass the Senate.
The Senate. I understand. My last question is regards to the Affordable Care Act.
Sure.
When my wife and I were married, there was a point in our marriage when we were facing financial difficulties with the pressure of the cost. I'm a veteran, 10 years of the Navy, and there was no waiver for veterans to get out from underneath that. So we had to reluctantly choose to file for divorce, which was recommended by the ACA as a way to avoid the cost. So my wife had to pass on, and I'm her ex. I couldn't, have her leave this earth as her husband. That's something I think that needs to be looked at and maybe addressed, because there's, I think, many more Americans that are facing that issue. And I'd love to be part of that process if possible.
Well, we will seek your input on that, and thank you for bringing that. Like I said earlier, the Affordable Care Act was not a perfect piece of legislation by any stretch of the imagination. This is one of several things that need to be corrected as we go forward. But thank you, and thank you for bringing it to our attention, and our staff will work with you before you leave tonight. We'll sit down and we'll set up the time and we'll get on it.
Thank you, Congressman.
You're welcome. Thank you. Can you get the last word, sir?
Oh, goody gumdrops. I'm going to,
all right.
I'm a West Hartford resident. I'm going to address your subcommittee. Social Security, you can hear me?
Yep.
I disagree with your solution.
Okay.
Okay. A number of years ago, we took the cap off of Medicare. Why don't we do the same thing for Social Security? Take the cap off. Let me finish.
Okay.
With the cap off, and the people who are making a lot more money than $400,000 a year, that money coming in would easily offset the 1% increase you would probably make, or at least mitigate it. Secondly,
Well, can I answer that?
be my guest.
It doesn't. We looked at it. And
still think it's a good
it's 400,000 and above. We lift the cap on people 400,000 and above. But if you were to lift the cap completely, it does not make Social Security sustainably solvent. It only makes Social Security solvent till 2054. That's not that far away. It's approximately 36 years away from now, and we're in the same situation where you haven't made a system that by law is supposed to be sustainably solvent, meaning beyond 75 years. So that's why we said, listen, there hasn't been an increase since 1983.
In the rate, I understand that.
So, and then we phase that in over 25 years. That's how we get it down to 50 cents a week.
The next question is, how much in non-negotiable bonds are currently sitting in the Social Security and Medicare systems from the U.S. government? Do you know?
How much in bonds is going to be sitting there?
Non-negotiable bonds, which means you can't, they're not rated for public, because there was an awful lot for a long time.
There is. There are several proposals on how to deal with that, but that's not part of the Social Security Act.
I think with that history, I believe would be a good idea to possibly take the trust funds from Social Security. And
Well, it was
Medicare.
actually Robert Ball's proposal, who was the head of Social Security, to do something along those lines. It is not part of this legislation, but I do think once the system is solvent, you can look at ways to do stuff that will enhance the ability to either lower premiums or increase benefits.
Well, I'm not talking about that. The non-negotiable bonds got put in by the U.S. Treasury.
Right.
My comment is maybe it would be a good idea to take the trust fund and Social Security and Medicare out from under the Treasury and create a separate investment trust to invest that money.
That's what Ball proposed. He proposed that there be within the Social Security Administration the ability to invest monies outside of the trust fund.
Well, invested trust fund monies in.
So it would go back to the trust fund, but
away
enhance it.
from the U.S. Treasury, so they can't touch it. Sorry, I don't trust them. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you for your ideas. You do get the last question, Harry.
Thank you. I'm Donald Pett, spoken many times, as you know.
Yep.
From East Hartford, Connecticut. My interest has been world peace, as you know.
Yep.
Working on that. And first, I want to thank you for your patience, for being our congressman, and also being a complaint department. I know that's part of your job. But it seems to me that we have no solution for world peace right now. No one seems to have a practical plan. And we're dealing with exactly the same situation with mass murders. You know, there's a lot of complaints going on. Everybody's being blamed, but no one is coming up with a practical solution. So I think I have a practical solution. It's been endorsed by a number of people. And we have some wonderful opportunities now. First of all, we have the possibility to educate people en masse because of video conferencing. We can bring people together in numbers, small groups, very rapidly through video conference at virtually no cost. The group that I have been working with for a number of years recently was offered a meeting with the Director of Education for Zoom, which is one of the major video conferencing companies. And we described our plan for world peace, and it would apply the same way to the issues that have to do with mass murders that we're seeing. And they were so impressed with our program that they immediately authorized us 50 pro-level links to start meetings around the world. And they said they would do more for us if they liked what we're doing. So the bottom line here is that we do have a method now. We have a new method of education using this video conferencing where we can get people to share their ideas. There is one solution that Einstein told us, the only way we'll ever create world peace, and not just that, but solve all of our problems, whether it's global warming or pollution or whatever. There's one way that we can solve all of our problems, and that is we have to teach ourselves a newer way of thinking where we cooperate rather than compete. And that's something I think we can do. Just as we teach hate, we can teach those skills. So what I'm just suggesting here, I do have written this up in a paper, and I'd like to give it to you if that's agreeable. I know you're pretty busy, but maybe one of your aides will take a look at it. And if a chance, I'd be happy to share the ideas that have been accepted by a number of people as being the answer to create world peace and deal with this problem. Okay?
Thank you. And I want to thank everybody in the audience, especially those of you who have persevered throughout the night. It's been a long night, but I also want to thank the citizens who have showed up this evening and had the opportunity to express themselves. You know, we're a democracy, and we're not big enough for the diversity of opinion, and then we're not a democracy. And I mean this sincerely. Every time I come out and hold one of these, I learn from the constituents I'm sworn to serve. Thank you so much.